This week, Disney has released its Q3 earnings. And since we just talked about Six Flags' earnings last episode, it's a good chance to compare the two. And since we talked, it looks like Six Flags has announced an additional investment. So I wonder if other people were thinking the same thing we were thinking, and that it wasn't exciting enough. So we'll get to that. Looking at the Disney Q3 earnings, it is, spoiler alert, it's really good. And I think it's mainly good. Like, there's a lot in here, but I think the main takeaway to me is everything seems to finally be going in the direction that they had been trying to get it to go in for many years, which is essentially that their storytelling is back kind of in at the forefront, of where it had been slipping for a while, but storytelling is coming back up, and the streaming has finally turned around, where instead of seeing huge losses from it every quarter, they're now seeing profit from it, and that's counterbalancing the money they're losing from their TV assets, right? So it's and Parks has always been doing well. So if you kind of point streaming and Parks and then some good stories, that's essentially where they're at. There are still some concerning moments, but overall, I think it's a really good analysis, a really good earnings call here. And I'm going to read an excerpt of the Deadline article on it, which summarizes it. While there are some reasons for concern, like the ongoing meltdown of linear TV assets, the rise of sports rights costs, the challenge of picking a suitable successor to CEO Bob Iger, the positives are manifold. The streaming operation, after years of heavy losses, is profitable with a target of $1 billion in profit for fiscal 2025. $2 billion grossing movies, Deadpool and Wolverine and Inside Out 2, have punctuated the film studio rebound with the foundational animation effort back on track, and Moana 2 looming as a likely holiday juggernaut. The Parks and Experiences division has also shown steady progress. So all these elements combining some key takeaways. I went through the earnings call and kind of broke them out into a few key takeaways. We got like finances. Obviously, the finances are doing well, but they're projecting high single digit adjusted EPS growth for the fiscal 2025. Um, and the part that I thought was interesting about the parks, specifically, they said Q1 will be negatively impacted by hurricanes and pre launch costs for the Disney Treasure, but bookings for the back half of the year are positive. I'm like, well, at least they're talking about. At least it's like in their projection where they're like, you know what, we already know Q1's gonna, have issues, and then we have cost and treasure, but bookings are positive. And I was like, well, it it made me wonder: are bookings positive potentially because of Epic as well? Yeah,
Yeah. It's interesting because I think that with all the Florida parks, everybody says, "Oh, it's going to be terrible because Epic's going to suck everybody else out of all the other parks and blah blah blah
mm-mm.
blah blah." No, what it does is anytime there's a new park opening, it sucks people here from other places in the world,
Yep.
and that's always good for all the parks. One of going back in ancient history when Animal Kingdom opened. When Animal Kingdom opened, Busch Gardens Tampa was terrified because it was kind of like, oh my gosh, here's another theme park that's animal themed and roller coasters and
Yep.
thrills and chills and animal and nature. And it was one of the best years in the history of Busch Gardens up until that point, because again, it brought people who were interested in that kind of thing to the area. And when they're here, especially if they're traveling from other countries, they're like, well, what do you mean? There's something else that I'm going to enjoy that's, an
Yes.
hour and a half, 2 hours away? Heck yeah.
Yep.
So yeah, I think it is a little bit of the halo effect of Epic. I think it is. I think it's also that you know Disney has been kind of under the radar for a while,
Mm.
and I think that people are like, you know what, we haven't done that in a while. Let's check that out. I really
Yeah.
do believe that it's the pendulum swinging back.
Yeah. By design, clearly. I mean,
Yeah,
they definitely. We've talked about this before, but people in the industry, we all know that they all work together, and a lot of them, because they go back and forth, and so it's like kind of by design. It's like, all right, well, Epic is launching and they're doing their media blitz, so it gives us a little bit of cloud cover and to fix streaming, really, and that's
right,
what they have done. And
right.
so speaking of streaming, some of the numbers here: they ended the quarter with 174 million subscribers, with 37% of US subscribers opting for the ad-supported tier. And that's huge because, that was, in the beginning, that was a big question, right? How much how would the ad support we had if we remember, we had never seen that, right? All we had was, like, traditional take TV, which was going out the window, and then we had the unbundling, and we had all these different services. But the Netflix model forever was like the model, right? And yes, Netflix is doing the ad supported, but we didn't know if that would translate. So clearly, it has translated, which is good because it makes it more accessible, to people that don't want to pay the price tag of having to do Netflix and you know Disney Plus at the same time. So Iger said the ad supported tier is growing, driving engagement. And then the ESPN thing is interesting too because as the Deadline article mentioned, the rights for those contracts are getting more expensive, but they are trying to get around that. So the company will launch ESPN's direct to consumer flagship product in fall 2025. Iger described it as ESPN like it's never appeared before, incorporating features like sports betting, sports betting, and AI personalization. Which again, I mean, who knows what that'll look like? But if the prices of this is rising, and now that sports betting is legal in all these different cases, and it's very, I mean, that could be a very big counterbalance to the
Yeah, that could
rising
be
prices.
incredibly lucrative. That could be incredibly lucrative. Going back to streaming for just a moment, and the ad-supported streaming. I think it's important to recognize, this is something that has been going on. This multi-tier experience has been going on forever. I mean, it was made most popular. Again, going back to perspective, going back in history, it goes back to publishing era. It used to be that books were incredibly expensive and no one could afford them, so then they went to paperbacks and then to trade paperbacks. It's all the same content. It's just presented in a different way to make it accessible beyond the velvet rope. So this multi-tiered level of this multi-tiered approach, to make it more accessible, to make it more so that you can actually see. It's not all or nothing, I guess, is my point. And I think that's something that is clearly tried and true, and I think it's something that's going to continue. I think it's something that we're going to see continue. I'm surprised that everybody was concerned about it, but I think what happens is, as you mentioned, the first model that comes out, that's the one that everyone thinks, oh well, this is the only one we can use. And truth be told, if you think outside, again, think slightly outside the box, and I know I sound like the old guy, but
Yep.
look back to see what's happened and what's been done before in other industries, because none of the problems that we're having are new. There's always been, oh gosh, so and so is taking more of the market share. Pick an industry. You can pick any
Yep.
industry in the world, or in history, and it's like, well, what can we do um, to either shake up that model, break the model, or um, is there a product that we can use to replace it? And I think that we've seen a little bit of both of that. Streaming has replaced the cable bundling for the most part, um, and because again, it had to break it apart so that they can now maybe perhaps start to put it back together, or make it affordable so that people can put together their own packages, so that they don't have to get stuck in what the cable companies, like the cable companies, wanted us to do. It's like, here's this, and this, and you have to have it all, or you can then add this and it costs more. Now it's just kind of make your own menu here. And I think that by making your own menu and making it so that it's affordable to a broader spectrum, what is it? The
Yeah.
the uh, the smart pig gets fat, the greedy pig gets eaten. I think that's what's happened here, is that they've finally started to realize, what, we can do this. We don't have to do this so that they have to pay for everything. We can do this so that we can have ad content, as well as a subscription fee, as long as the subscription fee doesn't outweigh. I mean, let's face it. If you watch anything online, which is how the vast majority of people have been trained to consume content now, um, you get ads. You get interruptions. If you're playing a game that you haven't bought out the ads, you will have time
Yeah.
between rounds, quote unquote, where you have to sit through and people are just used to it. They recognize it and they accept it. Um, so yeah, I'm glad to see. I will be completely honest. I'm really glad to see that Disney is turning
Yeah.
around, because I was concerned that it
Yeah.
wasn't going to. Disney is a part of a part of my mother's portfolio, my mother's stock portfolio, and it's been, as we've said, pretty much tanking. I mean, it's just been sucking wind. And the only reason I suggested putting it in there is because at the time there were some things that,
Yeah.
as Philip mentioned earlier, Disney was on, they knew what they wanted to do and they had a plan to get there, but it has just taken so much time for it to turn around. And what's really interesting is someone completely outside the industry, my mom's financial advisor, said, "Don't sell yet. There's a big
Yep.
uptick coming." She knew it, and I don't know how, but she knew that there was a big turnaround, and it appears as though we are. I'm not going to get overly confident, but it appears as though we're seeing the beginnings of that right now.
Well, I think a lot of that turnaround. I mean, honestly, I think I think my just personal take on this is that a lot of the turnaround has to go back to the storytelling, and I know that Iger always gives lip service to that, and I think he right when he came back, he did talk about switching, moving around organization of departments so that they would have a better ability to tell better stories. And I think who's to say really? I don't know. I mean, I don't know how, it's whatever on that. But I do think that there's no getting around it, right? I'm not sure that this is all coincidence, right? That the Deadpool and Wolverine, I mean, that was an excellent, excellent movie. And Inside Out 2 was excellent, and um, I don't know. It's one of those things where, yes, Disney has all these separate businesses, but at the end of the day, I feel like it still comes down to their storytelling. And, they need to be able to magnify the upcoming content like Moana 2. I mean, who knows, right? But everyone's excited for it, right? So it's like,
Well, and let's talk about park
yep,
content too. I mean, the announcement of
yep,
Villains Land is huge. I mean, that's been something that Disney fans have been wanting
yep,
forever. And it's very interesting to talk to people who have worked in the parks for years because they will actually say, the parks have kind of been carrying the company
yep,
for a while, and that was not the intent. That was not how they were designed. That was not the original business model. But because the parks were able to adapt for some reason, easier than the either the film side, the TV side, the streaming side. They were quite often asked to reduce their budget in order to make up
yeah,
for the loss in other areas. But I think it's interesting now that as things are starting to turn around, it also happens to come at the time when this new land announcement
right,
has been made and or continues forward. I mean, we all kind of heard
yeah,
rumblings, but um, continues forward, and I think it just shows a whole new interest. And then combine that with Epic and combine. I mean, there's a lot of things that have all come together to form kind of a perfect storm for Disney, and I'm excited to
right,
see that.
right. And I think also to underscore what you were saying about the parks adapting, I mean, it's also not just adapting in their budget adjustment, but also adapting in, like, we've talked about this, but their long-term plan. I mean, now going to the parks really does look like just advertising for, the IP. I mean, look at Epcot, right? I mean, these things have been transitioning over, and so really,
Hmm.
I think it's, again, it's good and bad. Like, the parks have adapted, become much more showcasing the IPs. If the IPs are good, that means the multiplier effect is stronger. But if there's something where nobody was like, I mean, look at all the years of just flops that they had, right? Eh.
Right,
I mean, again, look at
right,
the Villains Land. The villains that going to Villains Land are the villains that we grew up with. They're not the new
correct.
villain.
Correct. That's absolutely correct. Yeah, and again, I think that all ties back. It's all part of a very complex but much larger package than we like to think of, because that goes right back to the
Yep.
storytelling. Is there good storytelling happening? And if so, there are going to be good IPs that people want to see, that people want to experience, whether it's streaming or on film or whether it is live in the parks. So I think that, and I know I sound like a broken record because I'm all
Yeah.
about storytelling. I always have been throughout my entire career. But I think this is just proving that good storytelling
Right,
equals
right.
profit.
Well, potentially. I mean, I think we will talk about that, because I feel like Six Flags is not at all. They're going the opposite direction. But um, so to finish off with the Disney analysis from their earnings, like I mentioned, it's not all sunshine and roses, right? The international parks saw softness, particularly in Paris due to the Olympics, and in Shanghai. They said that they kind of predicted that. So, maybe they did, maybe they didn't. But and then of course, as we mentioned at the top of the show, there's also the challenges now of Iger picking a successor, which we're doing this dance. It feels like almost like the election cycle, but it's at Disney, where you're like, okay, well now we're back to like, all right, how is this gonna go? And it's like, has he been properly training somebody? Like, how is that gonna go? And then keep in mind, Disney's still on a time clock because the bulk of their revenue traditionally came from their TV assets, and those are like melting down. And so the real question is like that's like a melting snow cone, right? So you're like, like can we how what can we do before this melts in our hands? I mean, that's like, and then will the sports rights, how fast will they rise? Like how fast will the TV assets down in value? How fast will the sports rights raise because other places can do betting too? And then Iger's succession. I mean, there are other elements
Yeah,
here,
Iger's succession.
that complicate this.
I think Iger's succession, if he can set things up right, I think Iger's succession is more really the sort of optics of
Yeah.
the situation. Because if Iger's successor really doesn't even do much for a couple years, it's really not unlikely that it's going to affect the quality of the product. But the optics of it, confidence. I mean, that's a huge issue when it comes to
Yep.
stock pricing. The smallest lack of confidence can create these
Yep.
huge drops in
Yep.
stock value. So we just have to make sure that he finds somebody that is not just a buddy or a crony, and that he finds somebody that is qualified and popular amongst the
Yep.
stockholders. And I know you're right; it does sound like the
Yep.
political cycle, but it is essential. And I hope that investors and big investors, significantly larger investors than I, recognize the importance of these optics to keep their investments
Yeah.
profitable.
Well, so, speaking of investments and profit, Six Flags has announced a big investment plan. So this came after the earnings call, and again, I'm wondering if it came after. I mean, is it because the earnings call?
They listen to us. They listen to the fact that we said, "Hey, what does this mean?" And now
Well,
they're
I'm
going to
sure
tell
other
us.
people also said it.
They
I don't know
follow
about that.
us. They do. They do.
So
Yeah, I'm
I'll
sure they do.
read some excerpts, and this is from actually their own press release. So they said that blah 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 blah. They announced they'll.
They said
Yeah,
blah blah
well, the
blah blah blah
first half is
blah.
like um let's see.
So like every other
Yeah.
press release, really.
They said they're going to announce more than 1 billion over the next 2 years to enhance the guest experience at its 42 parks. The investments, which will total between 500 million and 525 million in both 2025 and 2026, will include new rides, attractions, themed areas, dining upgrades, and technology enhancements. Let's see. Specifically, okay, those plans include 7 new roller coasters, along with an expanded roster of popular seasonal events, of which they didn't explain at all. They only announced some of the coasters. In addition, the all new all park passport add on will allow season pass holders and members to visit all 42 of the company's amusement and water parks beginning January 6th. So what they announced in terms of new rides, they didn't give any names or specifics or any of that. They kind of just gave us a bullet point list here. Carowinds, Canada Wonderland, Kings Island, Not Soak City, Six Flags Magic Mountain will debut a first of its kind coaster in North America. Six Flags Great America, 50th anniversary, debuting new kids area, commemorative events, and park enhancements. Okay. Six Flags Great Adventure will unveil a record breaking launch coaster over Texas, has a dive coaster, Mexico, family friendly thrill boomerang coaster. Okay. The capital investments go far beyond rides. More than 80 million of the overall 2-year spend will go towards food and beverage upgrades, which is good news. We talked about that, including new restaurant
Yeah,
concepts
that's
and
good.
improved menu offerings. Thank God. More information on these and other investments will be shared by both Six Flags and the individual parks as details and timetables are formalized. Um, so I think we probably know now some of the parks that are not going to get cut.
Well, that's exactly what I was thinking. I was wondering if this was in response to, or even a planned response to, floating out there that some parks may be going away. And when they talk about Six
Yep.
Flags Great America, that was the one that I mentioned
Yep.
on the last show, where, WGN in Chicago had come out and said, you do realize that Great America is a Six
Yeah.
Flags park, because quite honestly, people in Chicago do not think of it as Six Flags Great America, because if you grew up with that park, it's been owned by everybody who ever had a theme park other than Disney and Universal. So um, it's they just think of it as Great America. And I love the fact that not only did they mention that it was adding, a new kids area, but that they played up the
Yep.
anniversary and played up the
Yep.
50th
Yep. Yep. Yep.
anniversary.
Yep.
Because I was there opening week. So, but anyway, it's, I'm glad to see that Great America is less likely to be on the chopping block, or they're investing in it so that they can sell it. Who knows? But I think you're right, Philip. I think this was definitely in response to everyone's nail biter of, oh my gosh, is our Six Flags park going away? Oh, I
Yep.
hope not.
Well, you still don't know. You only know the ones that they mentioned, right?
Right, but I think that was to placate. And if you look
Yeah.
at this list, these are the ones that I think are um kind of the family favorites
Yes.
anyway.
Yeah. Well,
You know,
Knott's is not on this list, and I do think that not Soak City, right? So fine, but Knott's the main park, but at least Soak City's on here, so I think that's
yeah, but Knott's, if they put Soak City on there, I
yeah,
don't think they're going to sell
yeah,
Soak City or sell Knott's off
yeah,
and not Soak
yeah,
City.
true. So there isn't much to this, right? It's a very short press release, less than one page. So again, the details are not there. So that makes me think it's more like what you're saying, where there's almost like a planned response to counterbalance, some of the people like us with podcasts who are, complaining about what they're saying. So that probably could be it. Uh, it's interesting though if we can compare these two together. It's interesting what you said earlier because you're like, the storytelling leads to the profits, but here we have them carving out very distinct markets. Six Flags with their 42 parks, however long they're going to keep the full 42, who knows? But you see them really honing in on the thrill market. There's nothing in here about storytelling, about IP integration, about blah, 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 blah. No, it's literally like we're gonna make roller coasters and maybe get you better food. What that means, who knows? Is it going to be actually warm pizza? I don't know, or is it going to be actual food? Who knows? But and then,
That's one of their new restaurant concepts. It's going to be called
that would be
actually
wonderful.
warm
I would
pizza.
take it. And
Yeah.
and meanwhile, you see Disney really doubling down on the whole idea of this integrated approach, that's expanding parks and cruise line and streaming, really just integrating the putting everything on the concept of telling the story and then expanding that story throughout all of their assets and telling good stories. So really, to me, it's like story versus thrills. I think is how we're
Well, and what they're doing is what I see, the way I see it is they're just digging into what their core has always been. Disney has always been known as the storytellers. That was going back to Walt himself. That was the purpose, was to tell stories. Six Flags was always an amusement park. They became a theme park because that became the trendy thing to call themselves. Even when they have overlaid in the past, when they have overlaid IP onto a thrill ride, it's basically in the queue and the color scheme of the track, and that's pretty
yep.
much it. For the most part, there are exceptions that prove that rule, but that's pretty much it. To me, they're doubling down in what their core values have been, and I don't think that's a bad choice. I think that makes sense. If you've got people who want to go to a Flags Park to scream, eat, and have a wacky thrill time, great, great. But I don't know how sustainable that is, because and I go back to, and I kind of double down on my good storytelling equals
Yeah,
good profit, because if you've got a good story, you can continue to
that's
build on
exactly
it.
right.
If you're just basing yourself on thrills, those thrills, you know, they
That's
die
exactly
quick.
right.
We used to say the same thing. We used to say the same thing about roller coasters in general. They like to say that a roller coaster, they used to like to say, and it's not true anymore, that you could feel the attendance bump from the installation of a new roller coaster
That's
for
exactly
5
right.
years. They discovered that that's not true. It's actually only 2 to 3 years, and then they have to come up with something even bigger, newer, faster, funnier.
Right. I feel like it's a race to the
So
bottom in some ways, or like a reverse race to, I don't know what that.
It's just like, well, just like a roller coaster. Once you get to the top, once you start that trajectory down, you have no control, and it's going to continue to slow down until you get into the station. So I think that's what happens if you're solely focused. And don't misunderstand me, I love coasters. I am a coaster nerd. I love it. But at the same time, they, if you're looking at it from a business standpoint, they only draw attendance for a certain
Yep.
amount of time, which is why, I'm glad to see that they at least gave some, maybe lip service, but some mention to seasonal, themed
Yeah.
seasonal
Yeah.
areas,
Yeah.
or themed seasonal events, because that's honestly, and it's not just because I work in this industry, that gives an ongoing pop. If they could say, we're going to take, one one roller coaster, the installation of one roller coaster equals somewhere between, depending on the budget, a capital investment for a seasonal event between 10 and 15, sometimes 25
Mm.
years. So you could either do 25 years of a Halloween event or one roller coaster, which is not going to continue to trend. Now, the argument is, on paper, it becomes an asset and it becomes something they don't have to reinvest
Yep.
in every year. But they have to invest so much up front that they have to amortize it over
Yep.
so many years. And it no longer, the amortization then starts to outweigh what it's actually bringing in as far as
Yep.
attendance goes. So, and there are arguments that will go back and forth on this. There are numbers that show both are true. But my experience has shown, if you want to keep people's interest, and by interest I mean keeping that turnstile clicking, you need to keep up. You're better off investing in events and seasonal stuff that keep them coming back, which, by the way, also builds your season
Yep.
pass base, because it makes the season pass, gives the season pass greater value. Um, and then do your big coasters, spread those out just a bit more. But there are some parks that feel as though they have to do a big thrill ride every
Yep.
single year. And the sustainability of that does not seem to make sense based on the information that I have seen over the past 25,
Yeah.
30 years.
Yeah, I tend to agree with all of that, and I think it's very interesting, and I think it's possible that they're doing a balancing act of types, right? Where it's like, this almost lines up with exactly what you're saying in a weird way, where they're like, here's our 2-year plan, and we're planning on, essentially, it looks like what they're planning on doing is trying to revitalize some of their assets while also cost cutting in some areas, right? And so it's like a thin balancing line where they're like, if we put in, I think you could see exactly what you're saying, maybe, where they're like, if we put in, coasters in these areas, these 7 areas, that'll give us an attendance boost in these areas, and that boost will lead to X revenue for 2 years, and this is a 2-year plan, that allows these
Hmm.
parks to, equalize or whatever, and we'll offset that by saving synergies over here or whatever, and blah blah blah. I mean, I think you could kind of track their thinking in this, but to me, again, it still underscores. It's like this again. It still doesn't seem like too ambitious, right? Overall, I mean, it's not like a full portfolio ambition type of thing. It's like we're trying to tread water, and we're hoping that these new coasters, that it'll lead to it, like you said, 2-year attendance bump, which will help us tread water in certain markets or whatever, and equalize. Like it's not really a compelling vision in the way that like Disney has outlined their story driven plan for the next 10 years, or and we have all this synergy and whatever. So um
Well, but I also think, in fairness, we say that it's not a particularly ambitious plan, but they're already still reeling from the last ambitious
yeah.
move that they made, which was, the merger.
Yep.
So they've got to figure out how they work as the new company, if they work as the new company, what they need to trim off. But at the same time, they need to make certain that people know, hey, this new company has vibrancy and has exciting new elements coming into play. And I think the one thing that they're leaning into is, um, get a season pass to
Yep.
all Six
Yep.
Flags properties. That's
Which is interesting
huge
too,
to
because
me.
it's like how many people really will go, but I guess they're banking on a lot. Right.
I mean, Philip, you and I
But
both
we're
have
in a
friends
bubble.
that literally just
We're in a
travel the
bubble.
country.
We're in a bubble.
Yeah, but I'm not just talking about people who work in the industry. I'm talking about
Yeah.
people who are fans of the industry who will travel the country. I mean, one of my friends from college, he's a high school teacher, and over the summer he goes out and does coaster, coaster,
Yeah.
coaster, coaster. And if he can get one pass that gets him into all the Flags parks, guess which
Yep.
parks he's going to?
Yep.
Are the Flags parks. So, but where we're going to is somewhere else because our time's up. But I will say, as Philip mentioned at the beginning of the show, we are about to kick into IAPA week. So if you are listeners of IAPA, I'm sorry, not IAPA, no, of Green Tagged Unhinged. I'm unhinged already. If you're a listener of Green Tag Unhinged, what we're going to talk about this week on our bonus episode is all of our plans, what we're going to do, and what we're excited about. So if you'd like to get a little preview from Phillips and my perspective, go to Patreon, search Green Tagged Unhinged, find us, become a listener, and you get to hear us, not only kind of throw the gloves off, but also say a dirty word every now and then. But for those of you who are done listening to us for the week, thank you so much. Once again, we appreciate you as well. And hopefully we will see you next week here on Green Tagged Theme Park in 30.